Okay, 564 again.
There's nothing on their radars on the other centers at all on that particular area, that object that's up in the air?
It's up in the air.
Affirmative.
What's the altitude about?
I don't know, probably right around 30,000 or so, and it's with a strobe. It starts from going counterclockwise, and the length is unbelievable.
Arcade 5 in the next 2 to 3 minutes, be looking off to your right side. If you see anything about 30,000 feet, one aircraft reported does something. It wasn't a weather balloon or anything. It was a long, white-looking thing with a strobe on it. Let me know if you see anything out there.
Any traffic off our left lane right now?
I've got some passing off here at 9 o'clock in about
In the early hours of January the 20th, 1996, a number of UFOs were reported in the skies above central Brazil. Some of them were captured on home video. Then, in a bizarre twist, reports started emerging that one of these UFOs had actually crashed near the town of Varginha, and that the local military had recovered some alien bodies. For many in the UFO community, this was the most significant event since the Roswell crash of 1947.
We know we have a lot of evidence here, and there is a huge cover-up in Brazil since January 1996. I do believe we were visited by alien creatures who were captured by the militaries, and I want to know what happened to these creatures. I think the whole world wants to know if these creatures are still in Brazil, and definitely what happened to them.
It's just unbelievably undeniable. Undeniable. Now, it doesn't matter what the military say, they are hiding. They are hiding. They do have captured aliens in Brazil alive.
According to eyewitness reports, the UFO crashed on the edge of Varginha, a small industrial town in the heart of Brazil.
Well, about 2 a.m. in the morning of the January 20th, some satellites from the United States detected an object entering Earth's atmosphere. Of course, it was aiming to Brazil, and they let us know, the American authorities, or American military let Brazilian authorities know that it was aiming to Brazil, so we should keep an eye on it. Well, while this object was falling down, it was observed by a few witnesses. It was very strange because some of them could describe an object like a cigar-shaped, with a cigar-shaped format, like in flame, with some sparkles, things like that. Anyway, at this same morning, about 7:30, some people in the neighboring areas of Virginia started describing a strange creature. Obviously, the creature that survived from the crash.
In January the 20th, the fire department captured a creature, a very strange creature. They wrapped this creature in a net and put inside this 1 by 1 square meters wood box and gave it straight to the militaries who went there to pick it up. They said it was a terrible smell of ammonia, burning the noses, they couldn't breathe, and it was a very ugly creature. One of them told me that he would like to see me in a room for 1 minute facing such a creature like that because it was so ugly. And it had 3 fingers with long and very strong nails. One of the creatures in the military facility scratched one of the tables, wood table. You should see what happened to the table when one of the creatures just scratched it. Well, when they first understood what was going on, they got really astonished because all of a sudden, Brazilian militaries were right in front of an alien being. They just got so surprised because they never thought an alien being could be like that. They were really astonished, and they were afraid of getting some disease from it.
The description of the bodies connected with the Varginha case makes it sound much more like they were cargo than crew. They seemed to be woozy, they didn't have any clothes, the little horns, the color of the skin and stuff. Their reactions did not imply particularly high intelligence. Now, who knows, maybe this was a crew from a different place, and we don't know what their mental capabilities were or something like that. But you just don't get the feeling, looking at the drawings that have been made, the testimony of the witnesses, that we're dealing with particularly sophisticated aliens here. And I can imagine a cargo craft that ran into some kind of a problem, pilot error is common apparently, in which these guys were set loose and weren't really the operators of the craft.
Clearly something unusual happened, but there are a number of alternatives which do first need to be explored. One possibility is that we need to look at the likelihood that we had some sort of satellite re-entry, space debris coming into the Earth's atmosphere at high level. Clearly we do have some indication that NORAD passed a warning to the Brazilian national authorities that there was indeed some high-level event taking place. So that is the first thing that I think UFO researchers and others need to consider here. Any time that you have accounts, particularly if they're of sightings late at night, of bright lights seen very close above the ground, a lot of activity going on, what you may be dealing with is the military carrying out some sort of night manoeuvres. Now, you can have military trucks, obviously brightly illuminated with headlights and all sorts of other freestanding lights, for example. You could even have a low-flying helicopter actually hovering very close to the ground or actually indeed on the ground. And in some meteorological conditions, and I'm talking about the wind here, you need not necessarily hear a great deal of noise until you get very close to it.
According to reports, a combined team of army and firemen removed something or someone from the crash wreckage and then took them to the local hospital.
The reaction of the doctors and the nurses was kind of mixed up because some of them thought it could be an alien creature. Others thought it could be some genetic experiment, and some of them thought it could be the devil's son.
The military, some of them who actually took part in the capture proceedings, came to the researchers to tell, I was part of it. I was there. I helped to capture. I helped to hold. I helped to put in the box. I helped to transport. See, we have first-hand witnesses from the military.
The local fire station confirmed that they were called out to an incident on January the 20th, but their commander denied that any UFOs or aliens were involved.
acho que eu sou muito... Eu não tenho condições de falar. Primeiro que eu estava de serviço no dia, certo? Quem estava de serviço no dia é o sargento chefiando a equipe, né? Mas que pela informação aí que a gente tem, tanto faz como a imprensa, né? Como até os pessoal perito na área da ufologia, é a mesma que eu tenho, que eles têm, né? Mas simplesmente não se trata só do nosso ver, de falta assim, de prova material, se trata só de boatos. Então, o boato para a gente não é lógico, então a gente tem que ver. Com força até profissional, nós não convivemos com boatos, mas porém com a lógica. É só com a lógica que nós mexe. Então, se nós não tivermos condições de mostrar para o povo e não capturamos nada, então aí nós fomos centro da atenção, porque a pessoa, em geral, pensa que o bombeiro tinha material para transportar, como vocês viram aí, né? Foi testemunho, nosso recurso para capturar um ser extraterrestre com inteligência extraterrestre é muito escasso. Não, nós tivemos só o período, né? O período que foi o máximo, né? O pessoal procurou divulgar, procurou procurar com a gente respostas que a gente não tinha, né? Coisas que é difícil. Então, foi muito interesse que tiveram, porque é uma curiosidade. Nós, povo brasileiro, nós precisamos de heróis e de fato novo. E surgiu um boato que é um fato novo. Como foi o chupacabra, né? Que foi comédia até hoje. Certo?
Why do people say that the fire brigade captured an alien on that day?
Porque a gente aqui em Varginha, no mundo, dizem que os bombeiros han capturado estas trans criaturas em 6 de janeiro de 1996.
Eu acho que simplesmente para subverter, ter a cidade como uma atração, que foi uma atração mundial, divulgada no mundo inteiro, até serviu de parte cômica da televisão. E é uma forma de mostrar a cidade de Varginha para o mundo, criando uma ideia fantasiosa a respeito desse fato.
When asked permission to interview the actual firemen who allegedly captured these aliens on the day, the commander says that they were on leave.
Some of the gentlemen who performed the capture came to us and gave full report of what's going on. Now, it's not second-hand report. Those reports came from people who actually helped to capture, to hold the creatures. So this is the best report someone can have. I wish the Americans have a report of someone holding the Roswell creatures back 50 years ago. They don't, but we do about Virginia.
One of the witnesses who came forward was a soldier who claimed to have escorted this creature to the hospital. This is a recording of a telephone interview.
Foi simplesmente inacreditável. Eu não conseguia acreditar no que os meus olhos estavam a ver. Eles trouxeram uma criatura extraterrestre numa maca. É estranho, foi simplesmente inacreditável, a sério. Eu fazia parte da equipa que foi enviada para guardar o laboratório onde os cientistas estudavam a criatura.
Doutor, o senhor acha que existe mais?
Não sei dizer se estava vivo ou morto, era muito estranho. O nosso comandante estava com medo que apanhássemos alguma doença daquela coisa, o cheiro era horrível, péssimo mesmo, como se tivessem urinado. A criatura tinha mais ou menos 1 metro de altura, a pele era castanha, oleosa e brilhante. E aqueles olhos vermelhos, os olhos eram incríveis, enormes, tinha uma garra esquisita com mão. Quer dizer, de maneira nenhuma aquilo podia ser humano, era definitivamente algo extraterrestre. Estive apenas envolvido nisto no hospital. Enquanto abordava o laboratório, a equipa médica fazia todo o tipo de testes na criatura. Perceber se era autópsia, se estavam a tentar salvar a vida da criatura. Posso dizer que a equipa médica estava tão nervosa e chocada quanto eu. Basta imaginar o quão estranho isto foi, sério, inacreditável. No final, os médicos confirmaram que a criatura, entretanto, morreu. Sério, toda esta experiência foi a coisa mais doida que eu já vi. Sei que parece loucura, mas eu estive lá, aconteceu de verdade e vi aquela criatura com os meus olhos.
Pessoas de Varginha, no sul de Minas, juram que viram um ser muito estranho. Nem homem.
As dawn broke on January the 20th, Varginha found itself in the center of a UFO maelstrom.
Muita gente acredita que trata-se de um extraterrestre. E dizem também que o ser foi capturado pelas autoridades e é mantido escondido em algum lugar.
The town was just going insane because everybody was on the streets because many UFOs were sighted at that time. So people was just connecting one thing to another. I'm talking about hundreds, thousands of people on the streets, and everybody wanted to know, demanding answers. It was a kind of a mass hysteria, I can tell you this.
In fact, there were hundreds of reports of UFOs in the skies above Brazil, flooding into the authorities.
Surge uma novidade importante no caso do extraterrestre que teria aparecido em Varginha, sul de Minas. Uma testemunha militar afirma que a criatura foi mesmo capturada com vida.
O Fantástico teve acesso às declarações secretas desse militar. Segundo os pesquisadores que acompanham o caso Varginha, ele sabe o que está dizendo.
Mas os pesquisadores acreditam que a grande evidência do caso Varginha é o depoimento de militares que teriam participado das operações de captura e retirada da cidade do suposto ET.
The local military base which was involved in this incident was an officer training academy called ESA. When asked about the UFO crash and alien capture, they flatly denied it. But bizarrely, they explained the eyewitness reports of aliens at the hospital as a misidentified dwarf couple.
Porque na realidade, aparições de extraterrestres ou de OVNIs, isso não houve porque não houve uma comprovação. O que ocorreu mesmo foi o seguinte: no dia 20 de janeiro, estava chovendo muito forte em Varginha, correu um temporal. Esses caminhões Mercedes-Benz, que eles estavam indo na garantia. Então nós deslocamos 2 caminhões até Varginha para que fizesse a manutenção prevista. Tudo disso aí, no desenrolar de toda a história, houve uma série de coincidências de fato. Havia no hospital de Varginha um casal de anões, onde a senhora estava grávida para ganhar um neném. Ter colocado no caminhão e levado para o hospital de Varginha, onde o pessoal disse ter encontrado um casal de ETs, que na realidade era um casal de anões, estavam lá e essas meninas estavam para ter filho.
I understand that some of the Brazilian military authorities have said that the whole incident may stem from a bizarre misidentification of a real case which actually involved a dwarf couple being taken, I think, to hospital. Now, I don't know about that myself, but I mean, speaking from my own experience of the military, they are an honourable group of people, and if they say that this took place and that this is the explanation, I think we clearly have to put some store by that.
It's possible that a second alien creature may have escaped this crash, because several hours after the alleged death of the first alien in the hospital, a second alien creature was spotted hiding in waste ground on the edge of town.
Estava vindo do serviço e resolvemos passar por ali, que é caminho de casa, né? A gente mora no Santana, então era trajeto. E passamos por ali para ir embora para casa no trio, né?
A gente viu uma criatura estranha que no momento que a gente passou, não olhavam pra gente não. E quando a Kátia gritou, aí que ela olhou pra gente.
We asked the girls to tell us what the creature looked like. With the help of an artist, we built up a detailed sketch.
Marrom. A pele dele parecia ser muito mole, porque o sol tava batendo nele, tava iluminando, parecia ser muito mole, tipo no coração, uma coisa assim. Os olhos vermelhos arregalados, as 3 perseveranças na cabeça, veia sobre o ombro. Quando ela olhou pra gente assim, ela passou que tava sofrendo, que tava ansiosa, que tava com alguma dor. Não, assim, foi na hora que eu olhei assim, que eu fixei meus olhos na criatura, foi o jeito, assim, parecia que tava sofrendo. O jeito que ela olhou pra mim. A Kátia e a Liliane saiu correndo. Eu fiquei parada. Aí elas voltaram, me pegou, eu correndo e fomos embora.
They saw what looked like a devil. That comes the story. Because this creature had three things in the head that resembled like horns, but weren't horns at all. And it had a brown skin, a brown, like a grease oil all over, and the veins, black, purple veins, were very visible on the upper arm and the neck.
The 3 sisters' description of the creature they saw was remarkably similar to the one given by the soldier in the hospital. The local military commander offered an explanation.
Por causa desse temporal que caiu em Varginha, existe lá um senhor anão, ele é anão, baixo, ele é bem desfigurado, ele é retardado mentalmente. E por causa dessa chuva ele havia se machucado muito, né? Porque não tinha como fugir da chuva e ele estava próximo a esse terreno baldio, onde essas 2 meninas dizem terem visto essa criança. Porque realmente, se nós olharmos para esse senhor, ele realmente tem uma aparência que nos causa até um certo constrangimento e uma aflição, porque ele tem alguma disformidade física, né? Ele tem a pele realmente escura.
Mal, meu Deus do céu, nunca vi negócio desse. Será que ele tem coração? Tem alguma veia que você conseguiu?
Clearly there was something strange there, but there are a large number of strange wild animals in Brazil, and some of them are certainly not creatures with which Western researchers are familiar. It's a large country, and there are all sorts of unusual animals there that may indeed cause someone to say, my goodness, what's that?
How sure are you that they were telling the truth?
Well, for us, they're telling the truth, because what they saw there, it's not a dog, it was not a... because if you try to understand what kind of animal could look like this, you won't find it, although we have many animals in Brazil. But the oil all over the body, it was shining. The bumps on the top of the head, and also the eyes. Okay, we're talking about a humanoid. So when you're confusing with a dog or with a monkey, you could say, well, it could be a monkey, but it's almost impossible because a monkey wouldn't have those characteristics.
One of the other interesting things about the Varginha incident is that if you look at the testimony of the girls who actually saw this creature, they did not use any sort of language indicative of a UFO or an alien event. They actually referred to the creature as, quote, the devil, unquote. And it's very important to realise that witnesses, when they report something like this, will simply dredge something up from their own belief system, their own knowledge, and particularly importantly, their own cultural background. So what we have here, I think, is clearly an incident where something was seen, but this idea that it's necessarily something to do with UFOs and aliens may only have arisen once Western UFO researchers became involved, because that's not what the original witnesses said.
A few days later, another eyewitness came forward, an English-speaking lawyer who said she had seen the actual site where the UFO was alleged to have crashed.
about 20 minutes from the center of Varginha, right on the edge of the hills and forests which circles the town. It was about 2 a.m. and I was asleep when I heard a huge explosion coming from outside. It sounded like a bomb had gone off, a huge explosion. When I looked out the window, I could see this huge, massive fire and smoke coming from the hillside, about 1 kilometer from my house. I really had no idea what had happened, but obviously it was that. So I called the fire department immediately in Varginha, but there was no answer, which I thought was strange. But within a few minutes, I could hear their sirens, so I guess someone had already let them know. Just a few minutes later, I could see like 3 army trucks speeding up in the dirt track, which leads to where the explosions were, and then a helicopter. I remember thinking, why were the army there? And how did they get to this thing so fast? It only happened less than 5 or 6 minutes ago. I kept watching as both the fire department and the army units went right to where the explosion was, but it was way too far for me to see any detail. I started to think that maybe a military plane or a helicopter crashed, and that was the explosion I heard. But I still had no idea what had happened. I remember that the police and the fire department sealed off the whole area. It was only later in the day when I heard the news about these alien things, these creatures in town, and I realized that that might have well been, probably was, the crash site. That's when it all started making sense. I mean, I couldn't see much, just fire and smoke and stuff, but something crashed out there. I can 100% confirm that.
A few weeks after the incident, one of the soldiers who was present at the crash site, Marco Eli Shirezi, died from unknown toxic poisoning. His sister Marta is convinced he was poisoned through contact with this alien creature and has been fighting to get an independent autopsy on his body.
De trabalho na polícia, certo? E fez o trajeto todinho com a criatura, né? Saiu do local, foi até o Hospital Humanitas e depois só deu baixa lá na escala dele por volta de 00:45. Só que na hora que meu irmão fez a captura lá, ele podia ter simplesmente encostado, porque certos exames que eu tenho acusa que foi contagiado por pele. Não precisava ter nenhuma infecção, nenhum machucado, certo? Então, por isso que realmente houve essa captura, sim. E meu irmão participou, sim. Porque meu irmão não tinha nada.
Bizarrely, the doctors said that an autopsy wasn't necessary and ordered the body to be buried immediately. The blood tests were made available and showed that his blood contained 8% of unknown toxic substances.
Somebody from inside the military police from Virginia told me, I have this tape recorded, that Marco Eli Shirezi was involved in this capture. Somehow he got closer or even touched the creature. And all of a sudden he couldn't move his arms, he couldn't feed himself. He was really bad. They took Marco Eli Shirezi to the hospital. The doctors didn't say a thing to the family. A few days later, he died.
In fact, a member of the fire brigade, who was also involved at the crash site that night, also died of toxic poisoning. And although the people of Virginia and the media demanded answers, the authorities remained silent. According to our sources, whatever was recovered from the crash site was eventually flown out of the country in an unmarked transport plane within a few days. Destination unknown. And that should have been the end of the so-called incident in Brazil, except that a few weeks later, Another alien creature was reported in the town of Varginha, this time at the zoo. An old lady spotted a creature very similar to the one seen by the other witnesses.
Eu não vou afirmar que vi o ET. Eu tinha saído no alpendre para fumar. E vi uma coisa muito feia. Os olhos vermelhos, grande esbugalhado. E a cor dele era marrom escuro. Era muito feio. Animal não era. Isso eu tenho certeza.
What she told us is the creature had some light coming from the eyes because the place was all dark at night. But she could see the face here, a small nose, a little slit as a mouth, only because some light was coming from the eyes of the creature, no pupils. And all of a sudden, the creature was not there anymore. She went inside the place, called her husband and said, listen, we gotta get out of here.
Of course, no one knows what she saw or what she thought she saw. But it's interesting that in the days before this sighting, several animals had died suddenly at the zoo from unknown toxic poisoning.
Muito estranho que logo após o aparecimento dessa criatura, nós estávamos com um problema dentro do zoo em morte de animais que tinham ocorrido desde fevereiro. Tá? Eu perdi 5 animais e sem explicação nenhuma científica, porque o laudo técnico diz que morreu de não sei. E não é comum. Eu sou diretora desse zoológico há 7 anos e nunca tive um caso desse.
So had another alien creature hidden itself away in the zoo, or did Mrs. Klepf misidentify some other animal?
Got a lot of witnesses in this case. I don't think that people are making this up. What I do think we have to check out very carefully is the possibility that we are dealing with a series of events which have been, as it were, linked together, perhaps by people who are very keen to come to particular conclusions, and that we're dealing perhaps with nothing more exciting than a series of misidentifications and people putting perhaps quite extraordinary explanations on events which may be rather mundane.
The American journalist and UFO investigator Linda Moulton Howe compiled a detailed report on the incident in Brazil. She's convinced that not only did aliens crash down in Brazil in January 1996, but that both the Brazilian and the United States government deliberately covered it up.
They know and have been covering up for at least 50 years that extraterrestrial biological entities are interacting with our planet, have access to backyards, to pastures, and to even bedrooms in the human abduction syndrome. Not wanting people to be aware of that because they're afraid of mass panic, I can understand up to a point. But everything in me says life teaches you, knowledge gives you strength, ignorance weakens you. I think the entire planet deserves the truth, because whatever the extraterrestrial biological entities are doing, there has to be a reason for a variety of intrusions that have been happening in Mexico and South America in a very aggressive nature. But what is it? That's what we all need to find out.
She believes that the Brazilian Roswell has far greater implications beyond Varginha, and maybe even provides the key to what aliens want with our planet.
Biggest issue for me after 2 decades that haunts me to this day is what is the motive of extraterrestrial biological entities interacting with this planet. And in any given story, and any given eyewitness, you can find yourself swinging, oh, it must be horrible. Oh, it is so good and spiritual. They've healed people. But the government is nervous, and you find yourself swaying. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it neutral? Is it benign? What is it? And I've begun to realize that probably the most dangerous thing that any of us could do is try to box it in any category, because right now I don't know that that's possible, not from a human point of view. My own personal feeling at the year 1997, and that's what it falls into a category, because I can't prove any of this. But it's a feeling or a growing sense that the complexity, the profound level of complexity of what we are dealing with, a non-human intelligence that appears, as government insiders have told me, 1 million years in advance in technological achievement than we are, that's incomprehensible. What they're able to do with gravity, with electromagnetic spectra, it's beyond my ability to comprehend, or anybody's ability.
Intriguingly, the Brazilian Roswell, as it's become known, is not the only close encounter of the fourth kind that's been reported. There are dozens of detailed files, many of which remain classified, containing eyewitness reports and even photos of alleged alien creatures.
I'm convinced beyond doubt that we have recovered aircraft, alien vehicles, that we have made contact with aliens, that we are communicating with them in some way or form, and that we have vehicles and bodies in preservation.
I take a clear-cut, unambiguous stand. One, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some UFOs, underline the some 18 times, are extraterrestrial spacecraft. Most are not. I don't care about those. Secondly, we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate. That means that some few people within the governments of the United States, Canada, Britain, and undoubtedly other countries have known since July 1947, when at least 2 crashed flying saucers and several alien bodies were recovered in New Mexico, that indeed some UFOs are extraterrestrial spacecraft. 3, none of the arguments made against the first 2 conclusions by a very small but very noisy group of negativists, as I call them, the debunkers, stand up under careful scrutiny.
I think that undeniably and unquestionably we have been and are being visited by extraterrestrials, but quite what their motives are and quite what's going on, the jury's still out on that one. We need to know, though.
Based on 25 years or so of research and history and sighting analysis, doing case investigations, film photography, still photography, video, and so on, I've concluded that they are here, whoever they are, wherever they came from, whatever they're doing. Other intelligences are messing around on our planet. And I guess it's up to society to realize that and come up with some sort of a response before it's too late.
I think the major reason for reticence to discuss this subject publicly and for the extremely high level of secrecy is embarrassment. I don't think it's so much that they think the public is going to panic, rather that they, the officials in charge of this information, are going to look rather impotent were it known that there are extraterrestrials invading our airspace against whom we have inadequate defense.
What really happened in Virginia is still a mystery. On one hand, there are dozens of reliable witnesses, both civilian and military, who swear blindly that they saw alien creatures that night. There's an eyewitness who saw the crash site in flames, and there's a soldier who claims to have guarded the creature inside the hospital. On the other hand, the Brazilian military and fire department deny anything happened and that the witnesses are just misidentified dwarves.
I'm pleased to see that partly because of Roswell as a precedent, that people are taking such an event seriously. Is this perhaps, I don't know of any previous cases where beings like this were seen before. Maybe this is a new step in what's going on.
I think we're just having the biggest opportunity to prove that the mankind had some contact with alien creatures. The Roswell incident is a very important one, but it happened 50 years ago. This is recent. We have a lot of information from military sources, civilian sources, I mean fresh information. So I think this is going to be a very important situation where we can prove that alien beings had really visited our planet.
We already know the names of the people involved. We know the details of the operation of capture, of transportation of the creatures, everything. They can't hide much from us.
I think one must remember that witnesses are fallible. People make mistakes. People misidentify things, particularly if they see them under unusual conditions. So always, I would say to people, look for the prosaic explanations first. Look for the misidentification of some sort of military exercise going on. Look perhaps for the idea that you might have had some space debris re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, giving rise to quite a spectacular display. Consider again the entity report, that you might simply be dealing with some wild animal, startled and perhaps, again, seen by people that weren't particularly used to seeing this sort of creature. There are many, many things which perhaps individually wouldn't have given rise to this great incident, but when perhaps just taken together led to an extraordinary series of coincidences which, frankly, gave us a situation where people have got things wrong.
Rather than trying to close off and reject, I'm trying to stay as open-minded as I can on what could the motives be. If survival is a key issue, and that all of the information is saying our own survival as a species could be tied with whatever these extraterrestrial biological entities are involved with, our discovering what the issue is seems to me to be paramount, and I think that the government of the United States has been working overtime trying to understand that. If survival is the big bottom line answer, what is it that the extraterrestrials know that the rest of us don't?
The whole attitude about space, about beings from elsewhere, about anybody coming here, has changed drastically. People, senators, congressmen, and the president.
It was during this period that some claimed Stalin grew concerned about UFOs. It is said his interest stemmed from reports of a 1947 UFO incident in Roswell, New Mexico.
New Mexico in 1947 would have been a hotbed of Soviet espionage because we had all kinds of stuff there. The 509th Bomber Wing, the only atomic bomber wing group.
Purportedly, Stalin ordered Sergei Korolev, the founder of the Russian space program, to analyze information about the supposed Roswell crash and report his findings.
Mr. Korolev came up with an answer. Yes, UFOs exist. No, they present no immediate threat.
And after evaluating the information, all that the Russians had acquired on Roswell and on UFOs, Korolev concluded UFOs are real. They appear to be intelligently controlled. That's what he told Stalin, and Stalin in turn said, that's what my other people have concluded as well.
While concrete proof of the conversation does not exist, several Soviet scientific agencies did begin investigating UFOs in the ensuing years.
Stalin, after getting this information about Roswell and UFOs in general, did the same thing basically that the American government had been doing. He condemns UFOs in public and then conducts secret tests behind the scenes. He had all sorts of high-level scientists who would research the problem for him and then report to military officials, all behind the scenes.
Also hidden from public view were UFO reports culled from Soviet Air Force pilots. Between the mid-1950s and mid-1960s, pilots reported approximately 15,000 UFO sightings.
It is very difficult to find a pilot who has been flying for many years and has never seen a UFO.
Most of these sightings can be easily explained. In an era of superpower distrust, flights of American spy planes and spy balloons were common over Soviet skies. But investigative journalist George Knapp, who has viewed portions of the Soviet UFO files, found some of the pilot sightings perplexing.
There were 40 instances where Russian warplanes were sent after UFOs. This is not temperature inversion, this is not a weather balloon, this is not swamp gas, these are craft floating around in the airspace of Russia, and they sent warplanes to go chase them.
While pilots continued to report strange objects in the sky, none could offer tangible evidence to support their claims. But in 1968, over the skies of Riga, Latvia, an alleged UFO sighting was caught on film. As a Soviet propaganda film crew documented a test flight of a fighter interceptor jet, the pilot noticed an unusual object high in the sky.
And suddenly the pilot shouted, "Look, film it!" We looked and saw a triangle at a tremendous height.
Fighter planes scrambled to investigate, but the object quickly disappeared behind a cloud and was never seen again. It was later estimated that the craft was hovering approximately 7 miles above the ground. The film was sent to the Kremlin, where it remained locked from public view for years.
They really took it seriously. I say seriously because the film was taken away. It was declared completely secret.
Outsiders have only recently seen the confiscated film. While some maintain the film is conclusive evidence of a UFO, skeptics argue the vehicle was most likely a French-made high-altitude research balloon. As secrecy enveloped all government discussions of UFO issues, an underground army of Soviet ufologists began to form in the USSR. They kept their studies concealed.
Russians who study UFOs in this period report that they had a very serious feeling of threat from the Soviet government, that they were doing something which the Soviet government disapproved of.
The leader of civilian UFO research was Felix Ziegel, the man considered the father of Soviet ufology.
Felix Ziegel was a Soviet scientist. He was a doctor of mathematics and astronomy at the Moscow Aviation Institute. He made it his job to find out why are the strange objects or in the skies of his country.
Ziegel challenged the Soviet system by conducting paranormal lectures, organizing independent UFO investigations, and urging Soviet citizens to report any and all sightings. His efforts were not without risk.
We cannot say, of course, that people would be put in jail for it, but still Ziegel suffered. He was harassed both in his place of work, at the Institute of Aviation, and he was harassed by the state government authorities.
Ziegel and his investigators spread information about UFO sightings through an underground press network. Samizdat, private publications used to disseminate information, were strictly forbidden by the Kremlin.
In his time, brochures were printed in a samizdat way. They were collections of observations and letters, typed in 5 to 10 copies. All materials were typed with the use of carbon paper.
Samizdat papers were distributed by trustworthy messengers who secretly carried the copies from one person to the next. UFO information circulated in this covert manner until 1967, when suddenly it seemed as if ufologists were given a reprieve from government censure. Today, it appears this respite was a smokescreen, part of an intricate government deception. The complex ruse began in 1967 when citizens reported multiple sightings of crescent-shaped UFOs over the skies of the Ukraine and the lower Volga Valley.
It was also seen as far south as the Caucasus Mountains, where many astronomers in observatories in the Caucasus Mountains would see these objects flying horizontally from west to east, crescent-shaped, heading toward the east.
For reasons unknown at the time, the government allowed press coverage and independent study of the sightings. Felix Ziegel was granted permission to form a government-sanctioned investigative committee made up of over 200 scientific and military experts. In October 1967, they convened at the Central House of Aviation and Cosmonautics in Moscow. Their goal? Determine the cause of the mass sightings. On television and in newspapers, Ziegel's committee appealed to Soviet citizens to report information on UFOs. For the first time in Soviet history, UFOs seemed to be an open topic.
It was like a breath of fresh air. Freedom of discussion about a forbidden subject was permitted to the Soviet citizens. And this was something unheard of. And alas, it did not last long.
Within a few months of Ziegel's televised appeal, the steel jaws of Soviet censorship clamped down. Reporting of UFOs was once again off limits. The subject was dropped from the controlled media, and Ziegel's committee was ordered to disband.
The committee was to encourage people to report. As soon as the reports began to gather, somebody in Moscow quashed the activity, canceled the committee, canceled publication of further works, and put a lid on it.
Cries of a Kremlin whitewash were immediately sounded.
Why the cover-up takes place, I don't know. Is there a cover-up? There's no question about it.
But what they were covering up is the question. UFO buffs believe they were covering up alien visitations. I think the evidence is clear they were covering up descriptions of their own secret military aircraft and missile activities and satellite activities.
Scientist and NASA consultant James Oberg came to this conclusion in 1977 after studying Soviet space vehicle launch patterns and comparing them to the dates of the 1967 sightings. He deduced that the crescent-shaped objects witnessed in the sky were not alien in nature, but could be attributed to secret tests of a new Soviet missile warhead.
People in the area saw the rockets, especially at night, saw the streamers, the contrails in the sky, even heard the rockets. They were told by the government that there was nothing there, that it was not anything ours. It became a UFO phenomena.
Later dubbed by the Pentagon as a fractional orbital bombardment system, the Soviets had good reason to keep the tests secret.
It was designed to sneak under our radar as a first strike weapon. It was one of these scary things that you only build it if you mean to make a sneak attack. It was also illegal to have such a weapon because in 1967, the U.S. and Russia and other countries signed a treaty forbidding the placing of nuclear weapons into orbit.
But why, after crushing public dissemination of UFO information for years, did the government briefly loosen its restrictions in 1967? It appears now to have been a deliberate ploy to fool its citizens and the international community about the true nature of the sightings.
The Soviet government did not want the public to understand what was going on. They didn't want the Americans to know, for example, what was going on. It was a useful camouflage. It diverted people's attention. Because it was a UFO, Western journalists would laugh rather than investigate it. The cover-up by the Soviet government is in letting people think they're flying saucers.
The strategy backfired when the extensive UFO data collected by Felix Ziegel's committee was published in magazines.
The Soviet government realized what these reports really were. They're military secrets. Not described accurately, but accurately enough to be of use to the CIA if they ever caught on. The government said, "Oh my gosh," and other things in Russian, and said no more UFO reports get published in the Soviet Union.
For 10 years, public discussion of UFOs was effectively brought to a halt. But that would change in 1977 with the appearance of a strange-looking object over Soviet skies, witnessed by thousands of astonished citizens. September 20th, 1977. As dawn approached in the small Russian port city of Petrozavodsk, a spectacular aerial display lit up the skies. The incident would become one of the most studied UFO sightings in Soviet history.
The phenomenon of Petrozavodsk is one of the greatest abnormal phenomena on the territory of our country.
At approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, civilians and military personnel reported seeing huge star-like apparitions shooting in the sky.
As it flew up in the sky, appeared to come over the city and then head off toward the horizon. People who were out in the streets of the town saw this blazing jellyfish streaming tentacles down from the saucer-shaped bright core.
The impressive display lasted approximately 10 minutes. Witnesses claimed that a host of strange occurrences on the ground accompanied the sighting.
They reported all sorts of phenomena. They smelled ozone, computers were crashing, drivers lost control of their vehicles and went into ditches.
Perhaps the phenomenon most difficult to explain was the appearance of finely glazed holes in glass windows and rocks around the city.
There is no explanation for this fact, but the connection is direct by the time parameters. There had been no holes before the event, and then they appeared.
Witnessed by thousands, the aerial display above Petrozavodsk was impossible to refute. While the sighting remained a mystery to Soviet citizens, NASA consultant James Oberg quickly discovered its origins.
Because of my connection with the space program and my knowledge of satellites and rockets, I was able to find out within a matter of hours. There was a rocket launching that morning from a secret space center north of Moscow at precisely the time people were seeing this UFO.
The jellyfish-like display was triggered by the launch of the Cosmos 955 spy satellite. As the rocket engine contrails were backlit by the rising morning sun, it produced the tentacle effect observed by witnesses.
So this what they call basically the smoking gun of Soviet ufology. They call it a Medusa, or jellyfish UFO, because it was streamers of light coming down from the streamers in the rocket engines of the rocket, as it turned out.
As with previous mass sightings, the government had ample reason to keep the truth hidden from Soviet citizens. The satellite was launched from a secret military space center called Plesetsk, one of several undisclosed missile bases scattered throughout the Soviet Union. Most ufologists accept the satellite launch as the cause of the aerial display. But many argue it does not fully clarify the mystery.
How shall we explain the appearance of some beams that burnt the glass? When the pieces of the glass were analyzed at the Institute of Metrology in Moscow, they concluded that these holes resulted from badly glazed window glass. That is, a purely technical defect took place.
I do not believe that the launch of a secret military satellite would explain the holes that were made in the glass. My personal opinion, no, this was not man-made technology that's responsible for such effects.
There were some reports of holes being drilled into glass window panes and in paving stones. I saw those reports. I can't explain it. And all these sorts of additional phenomena, these additional reports, are typical of what happens when people see a very sudden, shocking sight in the sky and look around them for corroborative evidence. Most of the time, it's irrelevant, independent, and sometimes even imaginary.
While the mysterious holes might never be fully explained, the Petrozavodsk incident had much deeper consequences inside the walls of the Kremlin.
The upshot of this incident was the decision of the Soviet government to create a secret program to study UFOs.
In the weeks following the Petrozavodsk sighting, the Soviet Academy of Sciences received inquiries from several European nations concerned about the nature of the event. In response, the Academy of Sciences requested permission from the Kremlin to initiate a top-secret investigation of anomalous occurrences. Although aware the majority of these events were not paranormal in nature, the scientists admitted in their request that they could not provide a scientific basis for all UFO sightings.
The Academy of Sciences can neither ignore or explain the paranormal phenomena similar to that observed in September 1977 in Petrozavodsk. The program was organized to show that we did not know the answers to these questions and would be studying it on the scientific level. That was the way the official scientific program for studying abnormal phenomena and extraterrestrial flying objects started its work in the Soviet Union.
In 1978, the investigation that later became known as Institute 22 was formally started. The study lasted 13 years and was completely concealed from public view. But why did the Soviet government spend time and money to investigate a phenomenon it already knew the origins of?
There's really no surprise that the Soviet military, even if they understood the nature of most of these reports, would still investigate them. The Soviets traditionally spied on themselves as severely as they spied on the West.
If they already knew that these are missile tests, why do they have to have a nationwide study behind the scenes? I mean, it's not like the results of the study were ever going to be published anywhere. It was a secret. So it makes no sense.
While the rationale for the beginnings of the study is still debated, there is no doubt the scope of the investigation was far-reaching. The Institute 22 inquiry was conducted jointly between the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense.
It was very useful for the Academy of Sciences to collaborate and to carry out studies together with the Ministry of Defense, because naturally it was much easier for the Ministry of Defense to get the information we had no access to.
The armed forces were ordered to study what, if any, influence possible UFOs might have on the proper functioning of technical military equipment. In addition, hundreds of thousands of sailors, soldiers, and pilots were recruited to watch for and report on UFOs. No one was told why the reports were being taken.
The Ministry of Defense has an enormous observance potential. First, military units are located all over the country. Second, unlike civil organizations, an order from the Minister of Defense is sufficient for making a potential viewer of each military man, and this was done.
Every single unit in the vast Soviet military empire had to comply with this study. That is, any UFO, any anomalous object, any ball of light, any strange thing in the sky whatsoever had to be fully investigated.
Scientists were directed to investigate the physical nature of alleged paranormal phenomenon. The data collected by the military and scientists was analyzed in a lab located in a nondescript building in a suburb of Moscow.
The personnel of the laboratory were not numerous, not more than 10 people, and this number was never exceeded. But the specialists from almost all the scientific areas worked there, from a physician to specialists in radioelectronics, meteorology, and astrogeophysics. Practically all the specialists were represented there. It was done in order to study all possible aspects of UFOs.
6 years into the study, Institute 22 would be called on to scrutinize an incident of global consequence, when a suspected UFO incident placed the world on the brink of nuclear war. The early 1980s were a time of tense relations between the Soviet Union and the West. The era of détente had ended, and the Russian landscape was studded with intercontinental ballistic missile silos. Each contained nuclear weapons aimed westward. It was at one of these silos that a reported UFO incident caused a nuclear scare. Today, this ICBM silo in the Ukraine is deserted, dismantled in compliance with a nuclear arms reduction treaty between the U.S. and USSR. But at this silo in 1982, something went terribly wrong. It started at approximately 6 p.m. when soldiers and villagers in the nearby town of Bielo-Korovichi witnessed a strange object in the dusk sky. A military officer at the time described what he saw.
I was riding a motorcycle not far from here. I saw a large object in the air. It had a perfect geometric shape.
At the same moment inside the silo, an emergency warning light indicated that a nuclear missile had switched to launch mode.
The most telling testimony comes from the communications officer who said that somehow something entered the correct code.
But Moscow had not ordered a launch, nor had any personnel in the bunker touched the control panel. For 15 agonizing seconds, technicians frantically scrambled to stop the launch. Then, without explanation, the launch sequence was aborted.
They were ready for launch. The UFO, poof, goes away. Poof, the command control module goes back to normal.
Had a UFO somehow interfered with the launch controls of a nuclear missile? A team of investigators from Institute 22, the secret state-sponsored UFO research team, was immediately ordered to the missile base.
They established within a very short period, literally half a day, that a military training exercise took place at a nearby aerial ground.
Investigators learned that the sighting occurred at the same time and in the same area where the military was testing flares. Dropped out of planes, the flares provided 5 to 7 minutes of illumination. That explained the strange display in the sky. But why did the nuclear launch sequence activate?
The fact that the emergency situation coincided with the effects which took place is certainly a remarkable coincidence, but it is still a coincidence.
The ICBM control equipment was systematically taken apart and rebuilt, but no defects were found.
It's not just an electrical malfunction. Something entered the correct launch codes. That just doesn't happen every day. We hear from our government UFOs are not a matter of national security. The Russian government has been telling its people the same thing. They're trying to confuse us. This incident is clear evidence, if ever there was, that UFOs do carry national security implications.
After examining the ICBM episode, the investigative team of Institute 22 continued to scrutinize various sightings around the country. Some who reported UFOs had a much closer view than those on Earth. Cosmonauts.
The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, is quoted in the Thread 3 documents as saying, "I can tell you that UFOs are real, and if you allow me, I'll tell you a lot more." The second man in space, cosmonaut Titov, said that there were 7 UFOs dancing around his space capsule during his brief flight into space.
However, even to this day, most cosmonauts are reluctant to speak about any unusual phenomenon they witnessed in space.
There's a ridicule factor, there's a laughter curtain, there are career consequences from reporting a UFO and taking it seriously.
But in this rare interview obtained by the History Channel, 2 cosmonauts spoke of unusual objects they encountered in space.
Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke of such things.
Former Commander Vladimir Kovalyonik of the Salyut 6 space station revealed that on May 5, 1981, he observed an unrecognizable illuminated entity outside the porthole of his craft.
The object had an elliptical shape and flew with us. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. It produced a golden light, very beautiful to watch. A second explosion followed, and 2 spheres appeared. As we entered the darkness of Earth's shadow, I could no longer see them.
On a Mir mission in 1991, cosmonaut Musa Manarov managed to videotape an anomalous object during a routine docking procedure.
I was looking out the biggest window. It was directly in front of me. I am familiar with the construction of all spaceships, but this was different.
There is ongoing debate about sightings of unidentified objects by cosmonauts and American astronauts alike. Skeptics insist there is enough debris left in orbit to constitute a plethora of unusual sightings. As cosmonauts traveled amidst the stars, the 1990s saw major changes take place on Soviet soil. When the walls of communism crumbled, American UFO investigator George Knapp ventured to Russia, hoping to discover just what secrets the Soviets had been hiding about alien encounters. What he found was startling. Beginning in the mid-1980s, the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union conducted several summits aimed at reducing both nuclear arms and tensions between the two superpowers. Shortly after one such meeting, President Ronald Reagan revealed he and Mikhail Gorbachev had discussed the topic of alien encounters.
I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species from another planet outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries.
Reagan made 5 different public statements, including one to the United Nations, that, well, boy, wouldn't it be something if UFOs were suddenly a threat to us and we'd all get together? And sort of Gorbachev kind of responded, yeah, it sure would. You know, we would get together. Lo and behold, we did get together. You know, the wall came tumbling down, perestroika, glasnost.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union came a new era of openness in Russia. Thousands of miles away in Las Vegas, Nevada, investigative journalist George Knapp, who had studied many American UFO incidents, realized the time was perfect to explore Russian reports.
3 years ago, we had succeeded in obtaining several hundred pages of secret Russian UFO documents and photos. Other Western journalists followed. Today, it's a new ballgame. The lid has been dropped on government UFO files, although there is still plenty of information to be found.
It occurred to me, now may be the time to go ahead and try to find out what the Russians know about UFOs. It was a tumultuous, crazy time, but a wonderful time to be there as a journalist.
In 1993, Knapp traveled to Russia and was introduced to Boris Sokolov, the coordinator of Institute 22. Like many government-funded scientific projects from the era, Institute 22's funding had been cut and the project disbanded. Sokolov provided Knapp with some of the recently declassified UFO files, containing information on the cases that were more difficult to explain.
He had culled from the thousands of reports some of the most interesting ones and had kept them in these binders, and we were able to get them and bring them back.
Why would the Russian military study all of this stuff?
Colonel Sokolov said it was a very practical reason. They knew that UFOs could do things that their planes couldn't. Figured by studying it, they may be able to get an advantage over us in terms of stealth technology.
Upon returning to the United States, Knapp made some of the files public. As a result, Colonel Sokolov was ridiculed by some back in his homeland.
Officially, Russia was a democracy, but the communists still had a lot of influence. There were communist newspapers that attacked him broadly as being a sellout to Mother Russia.
But the public scorn Sokolov endured was certainly less severe than the consequences he might have been subject to in the old Soviet Union.
My friend put it this way. He said, if this had happened 5 years ago, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years ago, we'd all be shot for giving up these secrets.
But in 2000, the relaxed political climate allowed Sokolov and scientist Yuli Platov to publish a report summarizing the findings of Institute 22. Entitled The History of UFO State Research in the USSR, the report concluded that of the 3,000 UFO sightings investigated, 90 to 95% of the incidents could be attributed